Welcome to Slingshot 25 Shotcast, a series of bite-sized podcasts that will feel like an espresso shot to your brain. I'm Jackie.
And I'm Courtney.
Something we've been thinking about is, something kind of unusual, actually. We haven't done this before, but we're going to give it a try. We recently read the Women in the Workplace report that was published by McKinsey just a couple of weeks ago in October of 2022, depending on when you're listening to this. Maybe that was years ago. Who knows? Could be. But this report is essentially the largest study of women in corporate America. And McKinsey puts it out, I think it's every year. But I looked at it a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it would be interesting to maybe touch on some of the big headlines from that report and talk about some of the things that we see in some of our comments about what organizations can do based on some of the concerns or some of the challenges that are coming out of this report or being reported in this piece of work. So the big headlines of the report are that women leaders are leaving their companies at the highest rate that has ever been seen in terms of this study. And they're leaving at a much higher rate than men leaders. Now, there's three primary factors that get cited for this in the report. And the first is that women face stronger headwinds to advancement than men. That's one. They're seeking a different culture. Specifically, they want more flexibility and more commitment by their employer to equity. And they're also doing more of the less rewarded work than men are. And it's really that third point. I don't know, Courtney, if there's anything you want to say about any of those factors before we dive into the third one.
Yeah, I think when you look at all of the articles, and there's tons of stuff on LinkedIn right now, there's a lot of different articles, responses to this. I think the big themes are, one, women don't want to return to normal.
Yeah. And
the other thing is they don't want to not work. Like, they're leaving, but it's not because they don't want to work.
And it makes me think about, how much the findings of this report are tied to so many different things. So we encourage people actually to take a look at this report and read more of the things that are underneath this. But for today's episode, we really wanted to dive into that last one because we found it intriguing for a few reasons. And that last one being women are doing more of the less rewarded work than men are. And just to give a little bit more color around that, compared with men at their level of leadership, so they're comparing, apples to apples here, women leaders do more to support employee well-being. So all of the factors that go into supporting well-being, including things like inclusion and equity, all of that kind of work, it's not formally rewarded in most companies. Doesn't mean all companies, but in most companies, that kind of work doesn't get formally rewarded. And there was a little fact shared in the report that 40% of women leaders say that this type of work isn't even acknowledged at all in any kind of performance review or talent review of their work.
So when you read a report, like, my first reaction, to be honest, reading this stuff is like, it took someone to research and report this. This is sort of the bane of the existence of women. We have a lot of work both in our corporate lives. I'm glad there's a report that has the data for it, but also at home, right? Women carry a lot of the emotional labor. We call it mental gymnastics, all the invisible work of sorting out schedules and being the one to listen to the kids when their feelings are hurt or they're being bullied. Like, all of that unrecognized, unvalued, unseen things is kind of by definition what we spend a lot of time doing.
Yeah, that's right. And so as we thought about this sort of unrewarded work, there's a couple of angles that we want to take here, a couple that came to mind for me, and we'll see what our listeners think as well. The first is just exactly what you're talking about, Courtney, which is just the direct impact on women leaders in the workplace, that they are spending time and energy on work that isn't recognized, and that makes it harder for them to advance in the workplace. I mean, who's going to pick someone to lead the organization that isn't adding much value to the organization? So if they're doing work that an organization deems as less valuable, it sort of takes them out of the running.
Yep.
So that's a piece of it. It also means that women leaders, again, kind of to your point about what happens at home, is they are stretching thinner and thinner. Mm-hmm. And the report does show that women leaders are stretched thinner than men in leadership. The numbers they reported, 43% of women leaders are burned out. That's a high number, compared with only 31% of men at their level. That's also a high number, by the way. No disservice to burnout for men can be, obviously, it's just as real as it is for women. But clearly that's a problem of its own merits, of just what it's like for women in the workplace. And companies really need to pay attention to that and put some resolve behind that. So there was another thought, though, that came to mind for me, Courtney, and I'll love your thoughts on this too. And that was my sort of what the fluff response to this. And what I mean by that is, as we think about women leaders doing more of that kind of work that is getting less rewards, that work, by the way, let's talk about what that work is. Let's go deeper on that. And I think our listeners are going to relate very quickly to the kinds of words that we typically use to describe this work. Anyone ever hear of the touchy-feely skills, or the fluffy stuff, or probably the more ubiquitous soft skills? And when we use that term soft skills, of course, we immediately define those skills as being the opposite of hard skills.
Yeah. Which,
of course, no wonder they aren't valued. We hear these words all the time in our line of work. And the interesting thing is, I don't know about you, Courtney, but I'm not actually angry about that. I'm more sort of exhausted. Like, are we still here? But I also know that people use those terms because they don't have better ones. Mm-hmm. We don't spend enough time calling these skills out and giving them name and articulating the value that they have to our organization. So what I'm thinking we should call them are the skills that dramatically improve employee retention, satisfaction, productivity, and innovation, because that's exactly what they do.
Yes. Yep.
A more simplified term, if that one is a little too long for you, is let's just call them human skills.
Yeah. And when you look around your organization, I think each one of us were to reflect on who on the team is making people feel valued, cared about, that they can see their own progress, which is the definition of what it takes to maintain engagement for employees. Just ask yourself, like on your teams, like how often is that a female?
Yeah, that's right.
Might create some insights, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the moral of our story here, as we think about this, as we've gone through this report and try to find things that are meaningful and of value to our listeners, is those human skills are absolutely essential. And by the way, human skills, when we say that, we're tossing that around like everyone knows. I think you do know, but let's just call them out here. These are skills like humility, curiosity, empathy, and belief in others. Mm-hmm. It's just those true, deep, interpersonal human skills. Again, the stuff that dramatically improves employee retention, satisfaction, productivity, and innovation. That's what we're talking about. And I think the bottom line for us is that it's important, and now is the time. These skills matter. And we need you to upskill all your leaders, not just your female leaders, the ones that are fleeing out of your organization, but we need you to upskill all your leaders now on those skills. So that's your homework. Take a look around your organization, see how you are requiring those skills, see how you are measuring those skills, and how you are developing those skills. Well, I think that's all we have for this episode of our Shotcast, but we always have much more to say, particularly on some of these topics. If you want more, drop us a line at slingshot25.com. Until next time.